In the vastness of space, where stars were born and civilizations thrived, there existed a relic, forgotten by time. A ship, once feared by every race in the galaxy, had drifted into obscurity. Its once mighty engines lay dormant, its weapons systems silent. For centuries, it floated, abandoned and ignored, as the galaxy moved on. No one even remembered its name, only whispered stories of a dreadnought that had once been the pride of humanity's fleet. But now, after centuries of isolation, something strange began to happen. Far from the bustling galactic centers, in the forgotten corners of space, an unexpected signal flared to life. At first, it was barely noticeable, just a small blip on the scanners of an old research vessel. No one expected much, after all. Many signals like this came from derelict ships or broken satellites. But something about this signal caught the attention of Captain Ilias Drake, a man who had spent years studying the depths of space, searching for lost civilizations. Drake was aboard the research vessel Odyssey, a ship built for exploration and discovery. It had been on a routine mission to study nearby asteroids when the signal came through. At first, his crew thought it was a glitch. It was faint, almost inaudible, and the coordinates pointed to nothing. But Ilias knew better. Something about it felt deliberate. "Captain," said Dr. Maria Patel, the ship's chief scientist, her voice steady but tinged with curiosity, "you should see this. The signal is coming from a location no one's ever mapped. It's deep in the nebula Zeta 12, a region considered uncharted for centuries." Elias stared at the readout on the screen, a dark region of space filled with cosmic dust and gas. The coordinates were right at the edge of known space, beyond the reach of most civilian and military vessels. The Odyssey had never ventured so far, and it would be dangerous to do so now. But the signal was undeniable. "Set a course for the signal," Elias ordered. He knew this was no ordinary discovery. There was something out there, something important. The ship altered its trajectory, slowly moving toward the unknown. The crew, though experienced, was filled with unease. Space was an unforgiving place, and Nebula Zeta 12 was known for its dangerous storms and radiation fields. But despite the risks, Ilias couldn't ignore the pull of mystery. For years, humanity had been exploring the stars, but no one had ventured far enough to explore the deepest reaches of the galaxy. Now, the galaxy was calling them to uncover its secrets. As the Odyssey crept closer to the source of the signal, the strange, almost haunting transmission began to grow stronger. And as they neared the coordinates, the crew began to see something strange, something unexpected. Through the fog of cosmic gas and debris, the outline of a massive structure emerged from the shadows. It wasn't an asteroid, nor was it a space station. It was a ship, a dreadnought, far larger than anything humanity had ever built. And yet there was something eerie about it. The ship looked old, as if it had been left to rot for centuries. Its hull was scarred, and its exterior was covered in thick layers of space dust. But even in its dilapidated state, the size and power of the vessel were undeniable. "Is that?" Dr. Patel began, her voice trailing off in disbelief. She had studied ancient star maps, but nothing could have prepared her for this. "It's impossible," Ilias muttered under his breath, his mind racing. The ship they were seeing shouldn't be here. It should have been long destroyed or lost to time. No one had ever reported seeing such a ship. It looked like it had been abandoned, yet it was very much alive with the strange signal emanating from deep within its systems. The Odyssey drew closer, its engines humming as it slowed to a cautious approach. The crew gazed at the enormous dreadnought, which seemed to have been abandoned for centuries. It looked like a ghost ship, floating aimlessly through space. But as the research vessel moved into the shadow of the massive ship, the crew could feel something shift. The signal grew louder, and then it stopped. The Odyssey drifted to a halt in front of the massive vessel, its silent form now looming over them. They could feel the weight of its presence pressing down, almost as though it was watching them, waiting for them to make the next move. "Prepare for boarding," Elias ordered. The decision was final. They had come this far. If there was anything worth finding, it was here, within the walls of this forgotten giant. As they boarded the Dreadnought, the crew could sense the ship's ancient systems slowly beginning to react to their presence. The air was stale, thick with the scent of old machinery, and the walls were covered in strange symbols and markings. The ship was silent, save for the hum of the Odyssey's engines and a creaking of metal as it seemed to shift in the void. Every step they took was met with eerie silence. The doors to the main hangar were open, almost as if inviting them in. The ship's lights flickered to life, one by one, casting a dim glow across the darkened hallways. They had discovered something far more than a relic of the past. The ship was not dead, it was merely waiting. But waiting for what? As the crew began to explore further, they realized they were not just looking at a relic. This was a weapon, a vessel of unimaginable power. And it was no longer lost. The Dreadnought had awakened, but what had caused it to stir after so many centuries? And what did it want from them? These were questions they had no answers to, but they were about to find out. The crew stood frozen in the main hangar, staring at the massive ship before them. Its ancient form loomed like a silent titan, its dark hull gleaming under the faint flickering lights. The Dreadnought, once thought to be a forgotten relic, had awakened. The ship's systems hummed to life, slowly coming online as if it had been waiting for them to arrive. The air inside the vessel was thick with the scent of dust and rust, but there was an undeniable sense of purpose in the air. Something deep within the ship had stirred, and it was not willing to be ignored. Captain Elias Drake's voice broke the silence. "Everyone, stay alert. We have no idea what we're dealing with." His words hung in the air as the crew began to move cautiously, taking their first steps deeper into the heart of the Dreadnought. The interior of the ship was like nothing they had ever encountered. The walls were lined with strange symbols, some of which resembled ancient earth runes, while others were entirely alien. The ship's control systems seemed to be in disarray, but as the crew explored, small, flickering displays began to show signs of life. It was almost as though the ship was aware of their presence, slowly adjusting to them, testing them. Dr. Maria Patel, the ship's chief scientist, was the first to speak up. "This technology, it's unlike anything we've seen before. It's clearly beyond anything our species could have created." The others nodded in agreement. Even their most advanced ships couldn't compare to the intricate design of the Dreadnought. Its size alone was enough to send shivers down their spines, and its internal technology was something out of a science fiction novel. "We need to figure out what this ship is, and what it wants," Elias said. He led the way down a narrow hallway, the walls seeming to pulse with an eerie blue light as the ship came to life around them. The ship's strange artificial intelligence, which they had only just discovered, was beginning to wake up. It had been dormant for so long, but now it was awakening to find itself in the hands of humanity. As they walked deeper into the heart of the Dreadnought, the crew found themselves surrounded by more advanced technologies: holographic interfaces, powerful weapon systems, and data storage devices that seemed impossibly sophisticated. But the real shock came when they found a room unlike any other. A massive control room with a single central console. The console was dark at first, but as they approached, it flickered to life, displaying a series of ancient star maps, coordinates, and cryptic messages in a language they could not understand. "This is it," Elias whispered, staring at the interface. The holographic map displayed countless star systems, many of which were completely unknown. Some stars were marked with red symbols, others with blue, and one particular system was marked with an ominous black mark, an area of space that had been sealed off for centuries. "What does it mean?" Dr. Patil asked, her voice filled with awe. "We don't know yet," Elias replied. "But this ship is not just a warship. It's a map to something powerful." Suddenly, the ship's artificial intelligence, which they had assumed to be dormant, activated. A voice, soft but commanding, echoed through the room. "Welcome, travelers. You have awakened the Dreadnought. You have uncovered the secrets of the ancient fleet. Proceed with caution, for what lies ahead will shape your fate." The crew looked at each other, stunned. The ship was speaking to them, aware of their presence, aware of their every move. It was not just a machine. It was alive. And it knew them. Did it just say *Ancient Fleet? Dr. Patil asked, her voice trembling with excitement. This ship isn't just a relic. It's part of something much bigger. Elias stepped forward, his hand hovering over the console. He knew they were on the verge of something monumental. This Dreadnought was more than a forgotten warship. It was a key to unlocking a lost chapter of galactic history. But the voice, the warnings, and the strange messages made one thing clear. Whoever had left this ship behind had done so for a reason. Why was it abandoned? Elias asked aloud, his voice tinged with both curiosity and caution. The voice answered, "To prevent the rise of power beyond control. You have no idea what you are dealing with." As the voice faded, a new transmission came through, a warning message from the past, one that had been encoded in the ship's systems. The crew gathered around, eager to hear the message. It was garbled, filled with static and distortion, but the meaning was clear. The ancient war is not over. The enemies of the fleet are still out there. You are not safe. The Dreadnought has been hidden for a reason. Use it wisely. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. They had come seeking answers, but the message left them with even more questions. What war was the ship talking about? And who were the enemies it warned them about? More importantly, were they already on their way? As the crew began to piece together the fragments of information, the ship's systems continued to come online. The weapons systems were now fully functional, and the ship's engines hummed as though it were eager to move again. The Dreadnought was no longer dormant. It was awake, ready for battle, and it seemed to have chosen humanity to wield its power. But with great power came great responsibility. The crew now had the most powerful ship in the galaxy at their disposal, but they had no idea what threats awaited them. As they prepared to leave the Dreadnought's control room, Elias couldn't help but wonder. Had they just unleashed something far beyond their control? Suspense. The crew was about to find out that the galaxy had not forgotten the Dreadnought, and the enemies of its past would stop at nothing to ensure that it was never used again. The crew of the Dreadnought had barely begun to grasp the true power at their fingertips before the first attack came. They were still in the process of preparing for what lay ahead, mapping out their course through the galaxy, when the ship's sensors picked up an incoming fleet, one that seemed to be aware of their presence. Elias Drake stood in the command room, staring at the holographic display that now pulsed with energy. The system showed a fleet of ships rapidly approaching their position. Each one was heavily armed, and they were coming at a speed that left little room for escape. The sensors were detecting unfamiliar markings on the ships, something not even Dr. Patil could recognize. "This doesn't make any sense," Elias muttered. "There's no reason a fleet should be out here, not this far from any known borders." Dr. Patil's brow furrowed as she studied the incoming ships. "It's a military formation. These ships are armed to the teeth. Whoever they are, they're not here to negotiate." The crew felt the weight of the situation settle over them like a thick fog. They had just barely unlocked the mysteries of the Dreadnought, and already they were under threat from an unknown force. The voice from the ship's eye echoed in their minds. "You are not safe." "Are we prepared for this?" Elias asked, turning to Lieutenant Jackson, the head of their weapons division. Jackson stood at the weapons console, fingers moving rapidly across the interface. "We have the ship's systems online, but we haven't even begun to fully integrate its weaponry. I can activate the main cannons, but I can't guarantee they'll work properly." The crew had no time to wait. The approaching fleet was closing in fast, and the Dreadnought's defensive systems needed to be tested. Elias made a split-second decision. "Activate the cannons. We need to send a message." The ship's systems hummed as the energy weapons powered up. On the bridge, the crew braced themselves. No one knew what to expect. The Dreadnought was an enigma, and now it was their only hope for survival. The fleet continued to close the distance, now just moments away from engaging. Elias held his breath. He didn't know if they were ready, but there was no other choice. Then, in a sudden burst of brilliant light, the ship unleashed its first strike. A massive beam shot out from the Dreadnought's forward cannons, striking one of the enemy ships with terrifying precision. The explosion that followed lit up the space around them, and the enemy ship disintegrated in a flash of energy. Holy! Jackson gasped as he watched the carnage unfold on the screen. The other ships in the enemy fleet didn't hesitate. They responded with their own barrage of firepower, but the Dreadnought was ready. The ship's advanced shields absorbed the incoming blasts, only to release a counterattack seconds later. Each strike was more devastating than the last, and soon the enemy fleet began to retreat. But the Dreadnought wasn't done yet. One enemy ship, seemingly bolder than the others, decided to make a last stand. It charged directly at the Dreadnought, weapons blazing, clearly hoping to take down the colossal warship. The crew braced for impact, but in a move that no one expected, the Dreadnought's AI took over. The ship's hull shifted, adapting to the incoming attack. A swarm of smaller drones was launched from the ship's hidden hangars, speeding toward the enemy ship in perfect formation. They overwhelmed the attacking vessel, swarming it like a hive of bees, and before long, the ship exploded in a burst of brilliant light. The rest of the enemy fleet, now severely weakened, had no choice but to retreat into deep space, leaving the Dreadnought and its crew victorious. As the holographic display showed the remaining enemy ships scattering into the distance, Elias exhaled a breath he didn't realize he was holding. His mind was spinning. They had just defended themselves against an unknown enemy fleet, and they had won. But what did this victory mean? Who were they really up against? The ship, it wasn't just defending us. Dr. Patil murmured, a look of astonishment on her face. It was hunting them. This wasn't just a defense mechanism. It was a counterattack. Elias nodded grimly. And I think we've just made an enemy out of whoever these people are. The crew stood in stunned silence, trying to process the reality of what had just happened. They had awoken a weapon of unimaginable power. But what else did this ship, this ancient relic, hold? The enemies they had just faced were clearly not the only threat out there. The Dreadnought was designed for something much bigger, something far beyond their understanding. As the ship's systems slowly powered down, the crew turned to face the next challenge. They had no idea who their enemies were, but one thing was clear: the battle had just begun. The victory over the unknown fleet had brought the crew of the Dreadnought an unexpected sense of relief, but it was short-lived. As the ship drifted through space, the questions mounted: who had attacked them? And why? What did they want? The crew's initial triumph quickly turned into concern as they realized that the battle had only just begun. Elias Drake stood in front of the ship's holographic map, his eyes scanning the stars. The fleet they had just destroyed had retreated, but something felt wrong. The ship's sensors had picked up strange energy signatures from multiple locations, almost as if they were being tracked. It was as if they were being hunted, but the feeling was not mutual. "We can't stay here," Elias said, his voice steady, but filled with an urgency the crew hadn't heard before. "Whoever attacked us won't stop. We need to move, and fast." Dr. Patel nodded, her face tense. "The ship's engines are functioning at full capacity, but we've only begun to understand how to control them. If we push it too hard, we could risk tearing the fabric of space itself." "You're telling me the ship might explode if we push it?" Lieutenant Jackson asked, his face pale as he watched the engine readouts. "No, not explode," Paddle corrected quickly. "But the stress on the hull could tear open rifts in space, or worse, send us into uncharted parts of the galaxy where we may never be able to find our way back." Elias took a deep breath, looking at his crew. They were all still shaken from the battle, but there was no time to lose. Then we need to find a safe place, somewhere we can figure this out. And we need to do it fast, before those ships find us again. The crew got to work, scrambling to prepare the Dreadnought for their next journey. As the ship powered up, a strange sense of unity began to form between them all. The Dreadnought had transformed from a cursed relic into their last line of defense. But as they moved through the cosmos, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that the crew was being watched. There were too many unknowns, too many questions. Just as the ship prepared to jump into hyperspace, an alert went off. The sensors had picked up something huge approaching them, something with immense power. "Is it another fleet?" Jackson asked, gripping his weapon tightly as he stared at the screen. "No," Dr. Paddle replied, her voice tinged with fear. "It's one ship, but it's bigger, much bigger." Before anyone could respond, the ship jolted violently, throwing everyone off balance. The lights flickered as the Dreadnought's engines groaned under the strain. The ship was under attack. "Shields up," Elias ordered, grabbing the armrest of his seat. "We're not making it easy for them this time." The Dreadnought's shields flared to life, shimmering with energy as they absorbed the first of the incoming blasts. But this time, the crew could feel the difference. The enemy was stronger, smarter, and more relentless than the last fleet. The ship's AI began to hum, providing real-time calculations on their best course of action. But even with the Dreadnought's incredible capabilities, the enemy seemed to anticipate their every move. "We can't hold them off forever," Lieutenant Jackson said through gritted teeth, launching a counterstrike at the approaching enemy ship. Elias stared at the screens, trying to make sense of the situation. The enemy ship had already made its move, decimating several smaller sections of the Dreadnought's outer hull. But the larger ship wasn't just attacking. It was testing the Dreadnought. It was studying them, learning their weaknesses. "It's not just a battle," Elias muttered, his mind racing. "It's a game. They're testing us." Dr. Petal looked at him, wide-eyed. "Then we have to outplay them." As the Dreadnought's main weapon systems began to power up, Elias took a gamble. He ordered the ship to initiate a sequence they had barely begun to understand. A full reconfiguration of the hull's energy distribution system, designed to increase weapon output without sacrificing the ship's structural integrity. "What are you doing?" Jackson demanded, his voice laced with disbelief. "Taking a chance," Elias replied, his gaze never leaving the advancing enemy. "We're not just going to sit here and wait for them to crush us." The ship's systems hummed to life in a way they had never done before, the Dreadnought's engines glowing brighter as it began to move with an eerie fluidity. The energy reconfiguration worked, and the ship responded with greater precision and speed. With a sudden burst of power, the Dreadnought unleashed its full arsenal on the enemy ship. The blast was unlike anything the crew had ever seen. Massive beams of energy, explosive missiles, and powerful drones that tore through the enemy's defenses. For a moment, the attack seemed almost too much for the enemy vessel to handle. But then, to the crew's surprise, the enemy ship didn't retreat. It retaliated. The enormous vessel unleashed its own devastating counterattack, sending a massive energy wave straight for the Dreadnought. The ship rocked violently as the shields absorbed the impact, but it was clear that their attacker wasn't just powerful, it was relentless, and their time was running out. Elias clenched his jaw, determination setting in. "We need to finish this now." With the crew's combined effort, the Dreadnought's weapon systems locked onto the enemy's weak point. The final strike came just as the enemy ship charged its weapons for one last blast. The energy beams ripped through the enemy's shields and tore into its core, causing an explosion so bright that it left the crew temporarily blinded. When the light faded, the enemy ship was gone, reduced to debris floating in the void. The crew breathed a collective sigh of relief. They had won. But Elias couldn't help but feel uneasy. The battle had been far too close, and the enemy had been far too prepared. What did they know that they weren't telling him? The Dreadnought had proven itself once again, but Elias knew this was only the beginning. The crew wasn't just fighting to survive. They were fighting for answers. The victory over the colossal enemy ship should have brought a sense of peace, but instead, it left Elias and his crew with even more questions. The enemy had fought with an intelligence that couldn't be ignored. It was clear now that they weren't just fighting random opponents. They were up against something far more organized and far more dangerous. Elias sat in the command chair of the Dreadnought, staring at the screens in front of him. The enemy fleet had been wiped out, but there was something unsettling about the entire battle. They had learned too much about the Dreadnought in such a short amount of time. The question lingered in the air like a heavy fog. How? "We've got a problem, Elias," Dr. Paddle said, breaking the silence. She stepped into the command room, her face pale. "The scans of the destroyed enemy ship, they don't make sense. It's as if the technology we destroyed was too advanced to be just any fleet." "What are you talking about?" Elias asked, turning toward her, confusion crossing his face. Patel hesitated. "The ship we destroyed. It's not from any known civilization in this sector. And the materials it was made of. I've never seen anything like it. It was almost like it was built for one specific purpose: to learn." Elias clenched his jaw. That was the last thing he wanted to hear. They had no time for more unknowns. They had just survived the first round. But what else was out there? Who else was watching? "We need to find out who's behind this. If they knew about the Dreadnought, then that means they know about us." Elias was growing frustrated, but he knew there was no room for doubt. "Prepare the ship for departure. We're not just going to sit around and wait for the next wave to hit us." The crew moved quickly, gathering in their designated stations as the Dreadnought's engines powered up. The ship felt different now, almost alive with the hum of energy coursing through it. It wasn't just a ship, it was a weapon. But what worried Elias was the growing sense that they were the prey, not the predators. Something about this felt like a trap, and the crew didn't have the luxury of knowing who their enemies truly were. As the Dreadnought sailed through the stars, the AI suddenly triggered an alert. A signal had been detected, faint but unmistakable. It was coming from a nearby system. "That's the signal I've been looking for," Elias muttered under his breath. "It's time we paid them a visit." The crew made their way toward the source of the signal. Their objective was clear: gather intelligence and discover who had been pulling the strings behind the attack. But as they neared the unknown system, a creeping sense of unease began to settle over them. This wasn't like anything they had faced before. The energy emanating from this region of space felt unnatural. The Dreadnought's sensors began to overload, picking up a strange electromagnetic signature that seemed to pulse in rhythmic waves. It was as if the system itself was alive, a heartbeat in the emptiness of space. The ship was reacting to it, thrumming with strange energy that had never been felt before. "All shields up," Elias commanded, his voice sharp. "This doesn't feel right." The crew braced themselves as they entered the system, their sensors struggling to maintain a stable connection to the outside world. The vast emptiness of the space around them was broken only by the eerie signal that seemed to beckon them forward. It was drawing them in, like a siren's call. But Elias was no fool. This could easily be a trap. Then, without warning, the signal stopped. Everything went silent. "We've been caught," Jackson muttered. His fingers flew over the controls, attempting to regain the lost connection to the ship's systems. "I can't get a read on anything. It's like something just swallowed our signals whole." "Get ready," Elias said, his eyes narrowing. He could feel it now. Whatever was ahead wasn't just a fleet or a warship, it was something far worse. As they moved deeper into the system, the Dreadnought's systems suddenly rebooted. The entire ship jolted as if it had entered a new dimension, but there was no sign of anything physical that could have caused it. The crew was confused and on edge, unsure of what was happening. Report, Elias barked. We're not in the same system, Paddle said, her voice shaking. We've entered an uncharted zone. There's nothing here, just emptiness. Jackson cursed under his breath. Where did we go? What happened to the signal? As the crew tried to make sense of their surroundings, the Dreadnought's AI began to speak, but it was distorted. Warning. Disturbance detected. Temporal anomaly. Do not engage. What did it say? Elias asked, standing up and gripping the chair in front of him. Patel checked the data again, and her eyes widened in disbelief. It's a temporal anomaly. Somehow, we've slipped through space-time. We're somewhere, between dimensions. Elias' heart skipped a beat. You mean we're lost? No, Paddle said, her voice steady. We've been drawn into something far more dangerous than we could have ever imagined. Whatever is out there, it controls time and space. The crew felt the weight of her words. This wasn't just a battle for survival anymore. It was a battle for everything they had ever known. Whatever happens next, Elias said, his voice cold and determined, we can't let whatever this is win. We need to get out of here and find answers before it's too late. The Dreadnought floated in the vast emptiness of the unknown space, its engines humming softly, almost as if the ship itself were breathing. Elias stood on the bridge, staring at the blinking lights and the odd readings that flashed on the control panels. Time had seemed to slow down here. The crew was on edge, unable to fully comprehend the strange forces at work around them. This doesn't feel like space anymore, Jackson said, his voice strained. He stared at the flickering screens, his fingers tapping nervously on the console. It's like we're in some kind of void. We're not alone, Elias replied grimly, his eyes scanning the surroundings. This place may look empty, but something is watching us. The ship's sensors were completely unreliable. They had lost contact with the rest of the galaxy. There were no stars, no planets, only darkness, and an overwhelming presence that seemed to press against their minds, as if the space itself was alive, waiting. Suddenly, the Dreadnought's AI spoke in a strange, almost whispering tone. Warning. Entity approaching. Prepare for contact. Entity, Elias repeated, his eyes narrowing. Is it a ship? A fleet? The AI didn't respond immediately. Then, in a voice that crackled through the speakers, it answered, not a ship, not a fleet. It is something older, something beyond your understanding. The hairs on the back of Elias' neck stood up. He had heard of ancient, powerful forces before, but never like this. What could it be? And why was it here, in the space they had just entered? The bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances. The air was thick with tension, everyone sensing that they were moments away from something unimaginable. We need to prepare, Elias said, his voice calm but firm. Jackson, get the shields up. Patel, I want all the engines ready for immediate flight. We don't know what we're up against, but we can't sit here waiting for it to come to us. Patel nodded, her hands flying over the controls. The Dreadnought's engines hummed to life, ready for action. The crew had grown accustomed to surviving impossible odds, but this was something different. Then, without warning, the ship lurched forward, almost as if a force had taken hold of it and yanked it from its place. The crew was thrown into their seats, but they held fast, gripping anything they could to stay steady. What the hell is happening? Jackson shouted as the lights flickered. I don't know, Patel yelled back. It's like we're being pulled. The ship's AI, still crackling with static, spoke once more, entering unknown zone. All systems destabilizing. Prepare for re-entry. Before Elias could respond, the entire bridge was engulfed in blinding light. The ship was falling through a vortex, sucked into a dimensional rift that tore at the very fabric of reality. The crew struggled to hold on as the world around them spun and shifted. Time itself seemed to bend and warp. And then, in an instant, it stopped. The light faded, and the ship was no longer in the void. Instead, they found themselves in a place that should not exist. It was a vast, infinite expanse, yet there was something hauntingly familiar about it. Stars twinkled in the distance, galaxies swirled, but this space was unnaturally quiet, as though it was waiting for something to awaken. "What is this?" Elias whispered, his voice thick with disbelief. "We're inside the heart of the anomaly," Patil murmured, her hands trembling as she worked to stabilize the ship's systems. "But this isn't just an empty void. It's a place of consciousness." Elias' mind raced. A place of consciousness. What could that possibly mean? Was it some kind of living entity? Or was it something even more incomprehensible? The bridge was quiet, save for the hum of the Dreadnought's engines. The ship floated in the heart of the Silent One's domain, an immense, empty expanse where time seemed to fold in on itself. The crew stood at their stations, hands poised above controls, awaiting the next move. Elias knew there was no going back now. The ship was the last bastion of humanity, and they had to fight for survival in a realm where reality bent to the will of incomprehensible beings. "We can't stay here forever," Jackson said, his voice tense. "Whatever is coming, it's not going to wait." Elias turned to face him, his eyes hard with resolve. "We're not going to wait either. We need to make our move before they try to take control." Patil, who had been analyzing the readings, turned to face him. "Elias, there's something strange. The ship's systems, they're reacting differently. It's like the ship itself is adapting to this place, almost as if it's alive." Elias frowned. The Dreadnought had always been more than just a ship. It was a symbol of humanity's ingenuity, their ability to adapt and survive. But this was different. The strange anomaly in the air, the pulsating energy surrounding them. It was more than just a force. It was as though the ship and the universe around them were in sync, as if they had become a part of the same living, breathing entity. "This ship, it's connected to this place," Elias said slowly, trying to piece together the puzzle. "Whatever the Silent Ones are, they've been watching us, waiting for us to enter this space. And now it's like the Dreadnought is their key." Patil swallowed. "Do you think it's possible the ship's upgrading itself? That somehow the ship has adapted to this place, to the Silent Ones?" Elias wasn't sure, but what he did know was that the crew had no choice but to act quickly. If the Silent Ones had waited this long, they wouldn't be merciful now. "Incoming." The eye's voice cut through the tension. Massive energy readings detected, approaching rapidly. The crew scrambled to their stations as the ship shuddered violently. It was as if the very air around them was thickening, becoming dense with an energy they couldn't comprehend. Elias gripped the command console, his knuckles turning white. "What are we dealing with?" he shouted, trying to stay calm. "It's them," Patil replied, her voice trembling. "The Silent Ones. They're coming for us." A distortion appeared in the distance, an ominous ripple in space, bending and twisting reality itself. It was like watching a storm in the distance, growing larger and more intense with every passing second. The Dreadnought's systems flickered, unable to stabilize in the face of the oncoming force. "Elias, we need to do something now," Jackson shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "This is beyond us." But Elias, despite the chaos around him, remained calm. He knew they had one chance, one moment to make a decision that would determine the fate of humanity. There was no room for hesitation, no room for fear. "Brace yourselves," Elias yelled. "We're not running. We're going to meet them head-on." The Dreadnought's massive guns powered up, their energy channels glowing bright with raw, untapped power. The ship was no longer just a vessel of war. It was a weapon of the future, a testament to humanity's defiance. The silent approach of the Silent Ones didn't faze Elias. If they thought they could overpower humanity so easily, they were gravely mistaken. The enemy was closing in fast. In mere moments, they would be upon them, and the ship would be forced to make it stand. "Full power to the engines," Elias ordered, his voice resolute. We're going to show them that humanity isn't some forgotten race to be wiped out. We're here to stay. The crew worked in sync, responding to every command with precision. The engines roared to life, propelling the Dreadnought forward at blinding speeds. It was as if the ship itself was awakened, its dormant power now unleashed in the face of the Silent Ones. The ship surged forward, toward the anomaly, and into the very heart of the storm. The moment of reckoning had arrived. The crew could see the massive presence of the Silent Ones looming before them, shadowy figures that seemed to bend the laws of physics around them. They were no longer just a myth. They were real, and they were about to clash with the one force they had never expected to confront: humanity. "We're not backing down," Ilias muttered, his eyes fixed ahead. The Dreadnought broke through the final barrier of the distortion, emerging into a vast, empty space that seemed to stretch forever. And in that moment, Ilias knew it wasn't just the Silent Ones they were fighting. It was everything that had tried to keep humanity down. "Now," Elias shouted. The weapons fired, and the ship's energy beams surged forward, lighting up the darkness around them. The space itself seemed to scream as it was torn apart, reality itself shattered under the weight of the Dreadnought's fury. The Silent Ones may have controlled this space for eons, but they had never encountered anything like the human will. This was just the beginning of their reckoning.